Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending my talk on climate-inspired hacktivism. This is my first time presenting at AusCERT, and I'm really happy for that. I'm also conscious of it's 20 past 11 in the morning, so most of you will start getting hungry pretty soon. So I'll promise I'll do my best to keep this talk entertaining, and I hope this presentation impacts your way of addressing the threat landscape in a positive fashion. Just a quick disclaimer before we move ahead. I'm not talking on behalf of anyone here. Everything I say, it's just my present past experience, my career background, and my way of observing the world out there. And also, I'm not judging any activity, neither the aviation industry or the climate movement. I'm just analyzing this scenario as a threat landscape scenario for the aviation in current times. First, the agenda. So the agenda, I'm going to introduce myself, and I'm going to start with the conclusion. There's a bottom line up front. I'm going to tell you what the takeaways from this presentation are. And then I'm going to introduce you my hypothesis, that is the title of this presentation, the climate-motivated cyber attacks or hacktivism against aviation. I'm going to discuss several different subjects with you, like perception of an enemy, political motivated agents, hacktivism, and the times it interfaced with climate movements. The cyberspace and the evolution of activities to the cyberspace, the future of terrorism, the expected new waves for terrorism, the timeline for a climate movement, past, present, and future, aviation, the history of aviation under attack, how COVID impacted aviation, how COVID impacted other industries. There will be some information specific between the relationship between aviation and modern climate movements. And I'm going to cover the escalation of conflict, and then we're going to go over analysis of computing hypothesis. That is an intelligence analytical tool that I'm going to use that tool and use evidences to confirm my argument that there's climate-inspired cyber attack against aviation. So myself, my formal education, I'm a information system specialist and a computer engineer. And then I have a few post-graduation degrees in forensics, knowledge management, international conflict, network security, engineer systems for submarines, and more related to maritime. And the most recent one is this master degree at Macquarie University that is on cybersecurity, looking at policing, intelligence, and counterterrorism. I've been in this field for longer than 20 years, 22 if I want to be more precise, and outside those, from those 22 years, four of them in Australia. And I have experience in both public and private sector, including the military, critical national infrastructure, maritime, and the financial sector. I currently work for RightSec. I'm one of the founding directors, and there's a cybersecurity consultancy based in Brisbane. One of RightSec's clients is Virgin Australia, where I'm currently their virtual CISO as a service. I've been with them for longer than 1 year. And previously, back home in my country, I was the Chief of Information Security Officer for the Nuclear Propelled Submarine Project, a military staff with the Brazilian lieutenant officer with the Brazilian Navy. So the bottom line up front. So what are the takeaways for this presentation? What we're going to conclude, and I like to bring it in advance, not at the end. First of all, when you're working with cybersecurity, information security, and you start assessing the threat landscape, understanding who you are, who is the opponent, and what are the risks that you're going to be facing, depending on the industry you are in, your situation is going to be different from the others. So there's no one-size-fits-all solution, and you should never compare your threat landscape. You should never have a risk management approach that is not compatible to the level of sensitivity and criticality that your business is involved with. And your organization, any organization, in times of internet and everything online and a cyber version of everything, you're not an island, you're not isolated from the world. So when you go and you put together your information security management systems and you consider external factors, you should also consider political and ideological factors, because they will help you shape your threat landscape. And then this third one about the perception, public perception, how you are perceived by a sector of society or a group or several groups within society that they might be gaining momentum right now and growing in sympathy and support. How modern political and ideological movements sees you, and that this understanding of how people perceive your organization will inform who your threat actors are. Like if you're going to have a library or a register of threat agents, the way the world perceive your organization and your activity is relevant. And then when you're doing this study, researching and trying to understand what is your image out there, and if you understand this, people see you as a huge threat. They perceive you as a threat to the whole planet or to mankind. So this is the time when a minimal viable security doesn't work for you. You're going to need to bring the security bar up. Because you're going to be facing continuous and persistent attacks from groups that see you as a real threat to the world. And the fifth outcome of these studies is this: all conflicts, they migrate to cyberspace. So if in the past your industry was faced with threats and risks related to a certain type of movement, chances are now that the revival of that movement or other branches of that movement will come after you use leveraging the cyberspace for that. So what is the hypothesis that I'm defending with this presentation here? What am I arguing? I'm arguing that for the past years, the recent years, from the many cyber attacks that hit aviation, some of them are actually the product of a climate-inspired hacktivism. And I'm also arguing that you're going to become a target, not exclusively based on what you have. Not always people will want what you have, but some people, the way they perceive you will turn you into a target as well. And finally is that about the cyberspace. Your opponents will leverage the cyberspace, and in special for this study, the new climate movements, they will leverage the cyberspace to attack their perceived enemies. Everyone else is doing this, and they wouldn't stay out of this possibility. Talking about perception and perceived enemies, like it's important you understand yourself. Going back in time to the art of war, like understand yourself and understand the opponent and understand the battlefield. And when you understand yourself, it's important you define your most critical assets and you protect your assets, because indeed some threat agents, they will want what you have. They will want to monetize from what you have. They will exfiltrate and distribute what you have, and so you might get fined. Some potentially malicious inside. Nowadays, like, we get lots of people being made redundant. They might get a sense of injustice, and they might just want revenge, and they will try to prevent you from operating. And then independently of your industry, all those well-known threat agents, threat actors, hackers, and malicious insider, state-sponsored agents, and organized crime, you should have all those agents on your risk register, your threat actors library. But you should consider for present days, you should consider, it's important that you don't miss on this one, is like people that are out there that perceive you as a threat as well, because those will have the highest, the strongest legitimating factor. They have a real reason, like inside their minds, among themselves, and with the message and propaganda they send into the world, they believe they have a very strong reason that they should attack you and disrupt your operations, and if possible, remove you completely from the market, from the world scenario. So we always discuss when talking to clients, oh, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when everyone is going to get hacked. But then now, when we think about the motivation, what is leading people in different groups or criminal organizations to hack you, it's more a matter of how frequent and how bad and how targeted. Because if money is the motivation, then you're just another target, and eventually, yes, a matter of when they will hit you, but it's going to be in a more diffuse way, a more random way. Everyone is going to get hacked, and you still need security controls in place. You still need your resources, your staff. But when the motivation is about perception, and you are perceived, again, I'm repeating myself, if you are perceived as the great evil, a target that is justifiable because you are putting the world towards an end, so they will come to you in a targeted and a coordinated and a persistent way. And here's when your security posture, security culture, and your level of protections need to be superior to the other industries that do not represent the same threat for some groups out there. And then I'm talking about the climate movement, and I'm talking about specific groups that might want to hack your specific industry. I would like to go for some definitions and similarities between them and the times they've interfaced. So starting with terrorism, last time I checked, there was 52 different definitions out there, but all of them have something in common, like is it an act of violence or threat of violence against a perceived enemy, that can be people or property, and they want to spread fear for a political and an ideological, religious reason, and they have this sense of they have of oppression, and they being oppressed, or they part of a holy war, or they have this nationalistic feeling that is the legitimating factor behind all this, all their activities. And you look at terrorism, and then when you look at activism and the new climate movement and hacktivism, they have one thing in common. There is the motivation. All of them are motivated by a political, ideological, and sometimes religious reason. And you're going to see that they start interfacing between each other. And also in some of those groups, as they change the approach and tactics and techniques, they actually evolve from a non-violent activist group to a proper typified in law terrorist organization. And we've seen this interaction happening between hacktivism and activism in the past few years. And it's the thing with inspiring cyber attack and inspiring terrorism. You actually don't need to go and ask for help, but because you share, you have common motivations, and you have sympathy for the same things, and then you end up getting the help of a threat agent that has the means and the tools to perform what you couldn't otherwise do by yourself. So here we have two cases. We have the case of Theta Zero Decocidio, that they were not like with the government solution for the climate crisis, and no climate group, no ecological protesters went in and asked for their help. They are actually part of Earth First movement, but they went in and hacked the website by themselves. And the same thing with Anonymous. In 2015, Anonymous wasn't happy with the UN, during that UN summit, some climate protesters got arrested, and they didn't think it was fair, so they went there and hacked all the officials' credentials and exfiltrated the data and distributed the data online. And those are just two times that we saw hacktivists interfacing with the climate movement, and they felt inspired to do, and they had the means. So I want to cover with you the cyberspace and how in present days every activity, being it a criminal activity or defense and policing activity, they have migrated to the cyberspace. There's a cyber version of about everything. And with activism, they might go cyber, virtual themselves, or they might just interface with a group that is already cyber, that operates in the cyberspace and shared the same motivations. No one will escape operation in the cyberspace. So okay, I'm talking about ecoterrorism and chances of the climate movement escalate to ecoterrorism and this interface with hacktivism. So why I'm talking about it, not just making up things from my mind. When you go and study the future of terrorism, you have ways of approaching. You haven't seen the future, so it's a bit complicated, but you go and look at the past. You learn with the past. George Santayana, this American philosopher, said longer than 100 years ago that those that don't learn, don't remember the past, they are condemned to make the same mistakes over and over again. So the past is going to show you, going to give you evidences and indicators. It's going to show you modus operandis and spatio-temporal patterns. You look at the past and you can tell a specific group operates in this specific geographical area, and they have this modus operandi, and they actually go they search for specific targets. So you can anticipate what's going to happen in the future based on what has happened in the past. And you need also to observe the present, and it's really important to be always on. You need to understand the world around yourself, read, get updated with news, subscribe to feeds, and take some time in the morning every day and understand what's happening globally. Because any organization, either if you work for an organization or you are the security advisor for them, you need to to understand external factors that might be impacting you. And then you might learn about a specific group that's gaining momentum, that's is going stronger, and parents are taking kids from school to protest. Everyone like them and they hate you. So you need to be ready to protect yourself and for engagement. So with research, to understand the future, you go and connect the dots, and you can project the future and do forecasts and understand what the new threats and trends. And so far, what we can find for most of researchers is that the new waves, the new trends in terrorism are going to be about green terrorism and cyber terrorism. But still, no one can tell how soon and how much they will fully leverage the cyberspace, and they will start for cyber terrorism or for green terrorism in interfacing with hacktivism. Those are unknowns, and then you cannot tell for sure, but there's a way of addressing the future when you have sparse information and you have lack of indicators. It's okay to be creative. Most of people, when you talk to them about terrorism studies and intelligence studies, they will think this is very scientific. You either have numbers or you don't have it. It's actually not like this. You can predict based on intuition work in this field. You just need to go there and gather indicators that will corroborate with your intuition, and then you have an indication, and you go and further and assess that that line of reasoning that you had. Personal opinion, like expert opinion, matters as well. You can get someone with 50 years of experience, and that person might be able to understand indicators and and have an idea what's going to happen in the future. And for when you're working, trying to project the future, and you don't have enough data, and you don't want to risk, there's the risk of a confirmation bias. Like, you think that someone, this might be the new wave for terrorism, or those guys might be behind attacks to this organization, and you define inside your mind that those are the threat agent, and you just go and try to find evidences and data to confirm that. And then it's your bias, and you keep going, and when you realize you've gone too far, and you miss the real point. So one thing that I'm going to do with you at the end of this presentation is a intelligence analytical technique called analysis of computing hypothesis, and then we can avoid confirmation bias. And the other approach is what if technique. That is, what if analysis is largely used for business nowadays. It's just you start asking, what if the climate movement start interfacing with hacktivism? What if those climate change groups go from very pacific, no-violent people on the street straight to sabotage and physical attacks? And then you again try to find indicators that this might happen, and you're going to dismiss the ones that you cannot confirm. With the two new waves of the two future waves of terrorism that will rely on cyberspace, what have we seen so far? Both of them have used the cyberspace for propaganda, for training, for recruiting. They've caused material loss, like in especially cyber terrorism, the cyber version of any type of terrorism. We haven't seen any casualty yet, but there was case where some hackers, some groups tried to get people killed, like flooding a whole city would be one of those cases. With climate-inspired ecoterrorism, they're very good at propaganda, the flying shame, the anti-flying movement. They've already threatened to use cyber attacks, and also they like technology. They try to use drones at an airport location. They have these fear-based recruiting approaches, like the world's gonna collapse in less than 10 years. And they're big users of social media as well. So the cyberspace has enabled many of their activities so far. A bit of the climate movement timeline from the past to the future. So they always start as non-violent, grassroots, local and small towns, and they have their claims, and when they understand that the governments cannot compromise and the organizations cannot compromise to the level of demands they have, and then they escalate. In the past, they used to escalate to physical sabotage, ecotage, setting fires on things, and they had different versions of those magazines with monkey wrenching, like teaching people how to go and destroy the windshield of an airplane, or the systems the pilot would rely on. And all those groups, they have one thing in common: it's always bio, eco, earth. The planet is more important than the people, and if they see that the people are threatening the planet, they eventually go violent. With contemporary times, the revival of climate movement, we have seen so far the non-violent, the grassroots. We have also seen attacks to property, like they glued themselves on airplanes and runways, and the financial losses, they start showing up, like delayed flights and locked airports, and also the drones. The drones actually could drones flying where airplanes are flying. There's even birds can be dangerous at those occasions. So there was risk to life there, and also those in current times they inspire cyber attacks against the organizations that they perceive as a threat, and against the government, and they've threatened themselves of using cyber attacks. What's going to happen in the future? So again, no one can tell for sure, but if you study and research, you're going to see there's this potential for the interface, a more persistent and continuous, consistent interface between the climate movement and hackers, and all the sabotage and the disruption and that were performed physically back in time, it will migrate to the cyberspace. And we know that hacktivist groups, they are very good with DDoS, web defacement, data theft, and distribution. And also the tools that the hacktivists had available for them were not very sophisticated. But since now on the internet you have botnets for hire. There's after all those leaks and NSA tools, many government intelligence tools got weaponized, and they are available. The algorithms, the codes are available for everyone on the internet. And what's going to happen in the future? The climate change groups are going to get more support and more sympathy, and they will recruit more people, because fear is a great feeling to get people scared, and then they will go and support their cause, and they will try to influence politics and participate in politics. Here's just one slide showing like the life-threatening tactics that they resort to. Before discussing the relationship between aviation and those climate movement groups. Let's talk about aviation per se. So for the past 4 years, a little longer, aviation has been continuously under attack, and in parallel to this time, there was a new climate movement appeared, and new legislation, climate legislation, and the Paris Agreement. And it might be just a coincidence, but it happened in parallel. And when 2020 came, and there was and COVID-19 hit the world, the hacking activity against aviation reduced a lot. You can go and Google. You're not going to find one prominent attack against a prominent airline, and it was different for the past years. There's many, like in a continuous fashion. What happened since COVID is the aviation is grounded, and they're not polluting. So maybe the perceived activity that those climate-inspired hackers, the activity that was perceived as an evil, it's absent now. If the motivation was not financial and they were motivated by the way they perceived aviation. And it was not only airlines under attack, like giants like Sabre and Amadeus, all those booking systems, and even Aviation ID Australia, and many facilitators for traveling, and they were all getting hacked. And it's now not happening, at least it's not public. And then you might say, okay, it was only hackers, Virginia, and they had financial motivation, but they feel sorry for aviation now. So one thing that I've learned long ago is that hackers and organized crime and criminals in general, they don't feel sorry. They have no conscience. They don't feel sorry for anyone. And you can see, if you look for the numbers of cyber attacks during COVID times, it's like, you can read the news I have on this slide, like 5-fold increase. And they hacked the hospitals that are treating COVID people that fell sick with COVID. They hacked the labs that are studying new vaccines. They leverage COVID and have specific COVID-inspired phishing campaigns. They don't seem to be sorry for the organization is struggling across COVID times. What I think is that the numbers with the pandemics actually are showing that the hackers that were hacking aviation, they were not motivated by financial gain. They were hacking aviation based on what aviation represents to them. And then, Virginia, what happened to the supply chain? Because those guys also don't like the supply chain. They don't like mining. They don't like oil facilities. They don't like the nuclear field. So the supply chain is busier and busier. No one stopped eating. The trucks are on the roads. The container ships are still sailing, and they being smashed with the cyber attacks. They're being hacked, and this presentation is going to be made available for you. I'm aware of the time, so you can go and read by yourself. And if you say, oh, but those are ransomware attacks, some of them are ransomware attacks. Yes, everyone can hire a ransomware attack today. Everything is accessible in the internet. So now it's the relationship between aviation and the climate movement. Here's what climate movement thinks of aviation and what they want governments to do in relation to aviation. They don't like the tax benefit aviation has. They want a carbon tax applied even to passengers, and they want passengers to be able to fly a international flight only once each 2 years. They think the frequent flyer programs should be banned because they award polluting activity. They've singled out aviation, and they perceive aviation as an enemy. And they have this strong propaganda on anti-flying movement, like blaming and shaming people. And they have goals of net zero emission by 2025, which is not feasible for aviation. And when the UK government tried to help the aviation industry, some airlines, to recover from COVID, they said, if you help them, if you bail them out, we're gonna hit you with cyber attacks. So it's clear that they have something against this specific industry. And I just want to show you some slides with the news. It's all about threatening with cyber attacks and propaganda, flying shame, saying that aviation is #1 in polluting activities. And they have claims, they have demands, and unfortunately the governments cannot fulfill their demands. The governments are planning for net zero emission by 2050, and they're working hard. They have different projects, they have decarbonization, they have other measures in place, but it's still not compatible what they want, and they want it by 2025. That is like a few years from now. And what would happen if they cannot get to an agreement? There's no compromise. I want to show you the past and the present of warfare, how warfare used to escalate in the past. So in the past, there is a country that is doing something that is not acceptable, attacking the neighbor, and then the rest of the world get together and have a diplomatic conversation with them. Okay, they just ignored, and then they start with more lenient measures like some embargoes, commercial sanctions, and and they check, okay, are you going to stop now? If they say, okay, we're going to stop, then move on, everything's good. But if that country would insist in continuing with that unacceptable operation, so the rest of the world would resort to physical attack. And the conflict would escalate from the very lenient commercial measure to a physical attack. And nowadays, it's slightly different. They go with the diplomatic conversation, and they go to sanctions. And if it doesn't work, and then they move to the cyberspace. And from the cyberspace, if it still doesn't work, then they go to physical attack and maybe coordinate with cyber attacks. What would happen to those demands from the climate movement? They cannot be fulfilled by 2025. So there's few options. There's this conversation diplomatic with the government. They try to increase taxation to make it too expensive for people to fly, and then it fails. Would they jump straight to physical attacks and sabotage against airplanes, or trying to bomb to try to bring down a few aircrafts? I find it the less likely option. They wouldn't escalate directly to physical attack, but what I think that is very possible and highly likely, that they will resort to cyber attacks, because cyber attacks can cause all the damage. Like if you prevent someone from operating, if you exfiltrate and distribute data, that organization is going to get fined. They're going to not being able to operate, and being fined. There will be lots of financial loss, and plus the reputational losses. And as in worst case scenario, if they start hacking connected airplanes, and there could be casualties, but I don't think it would escalate so fast to that point. And here, just so you understand where I'm coming from, let's look at this analysis of computing hypothesis. What do? You list all your hypotheses of who could be a perpetrator, the threat agent behind a specific attack, like persistent DDoS. For 12 months now, aviation is under attack, and each airline is getting at least 3 DDoSes per month. And no one is calling to ask you for money. There's no extortion. They just want to prevent you from working. and then you go to your threat agent library, and you list all the threat agents that you have there. Don't go straight to one. Analyze all of them, and then you're gonna assess them against several assumptions. So this threat agent has the motivation to attack us, and if you find data that are consistent with this assumption, you say yes, consistent. This threat agent has the means to attack us with DDoS. Yes, if you find the data. And then there's, you have another assumptions. There are indicators. There is the modus operandi of this threat agent is compatible with the attacks we are suffering now. And then you go and list all the consistencies and inconsistencies, and you go and start eliminating the one, the hypothesis that has the most inconsistent data, and then you eliminate the second one that has most inconsistent data until you get to the one that has more consistency. But you make sure you assess all hypotheses against all assumptions, and you can have as many assumptions as needed. And this is a very simplified version of a analysis of computing hypothesis. And I have passed the limit time already. And thank you for watching until the end, for the ones that are still around. And you can find me on LinkedIn. I'll be happy to respond to any questions that you might have. And thank you again. Have a good one.